PolitiFact has archived a fact check. They have rebunked the lab leak hypothesis.
Oh, yeah.
Archived fact check. Tucker Carlson guest airs debunked conspiracy theory that COVID-19 was created in a lab. Interesting. They have an editor's note from May 17th, 2021. The Great Rebunking. They say, when this fact check was first published in September 2020, PolitiFact sources included researchers who asserted the SARS-CoV-2 virus could not have been manipulated. That assertion is now more widely disputed. For that reason, we are removing this fact check from our database pending a more thorough review. Currently, we consider the claim to be unsupported by evidence and in dispute. The original fact check in its entirety is preserved below for transparency and archival purposes. Read our May 2021 report for more information, blah, 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 blah. What they're basically saying is they published fake news based on some guy's opinion. Let me stress, they say, researchers who asserted. PolitiFact, can we change our name to PolitOpinion? Because having some guys come on and say, here's what I think, is not fact checking, it's opinion checking. I could pull the opinion out of the ass of some homeless guy in my alley who says that he thinks it's not true, and I can publish to my website. How about I do that? I don't know who these researchers are. This is what annoys me about the mainstream media. Our opinion, guys, are facts. Your opinion, guys, are wrong. That's the name of the game.
Yeah. I mean, if you don't have total contempt for the New York Times and the Washington Post yet, I don't know what it would take.
One of the weird things about facts is they can be wrong. Like, a fact can be not right, but it's still like if you say the sky is red, that is a fact. That is a factual statement. It's not correct.
Fact.
It is also wrong, but it is still, it's not an opinion. It's a statement of fact that is not right.
That's actually a good point. And I think you understand this. You have to make a statement of fact in order to be sued for defamation. It's a false statement of fact.
Right.
But it has to be legally considered a statement of fact.
There's a factual statement in this context, though, right? Like, so this is clearly susceptible to fact checking, right? Like, did the virus come from a lab or not? I think the real question is, would it be a conspiracy theory? And I would argue that it couldn't be a conspiracy theory because there's no conspiracy theorized, right?
Well, not just that. It's when this story came out, it was is it possible? No one said it is. Well, a lot of people said it was, but like in media, in conservative media, in independent media, they were saying interesting. And the reason for it, like right when this story broke, I even talked about it before there was anything happening in the U.S. because the Wuhan Institute was right next to the wet market.
Right. And
so everybody was like, yo.
And you don't have to think there's like some colluding Chinese scientist deciding to, evil and unleash this virus on everybody. You could be like, somebody made a mistake. That's not a conspiracy theory, right?
It was got popped open.
If one person could have done something, it's not a conspiracy, right? I always said that it's about I think I told you this joke or before, like people would say the idea that Notre Dame burned because of arson. Oh, that's a conspiracy theory. No, one person can burn down a building. It's not a conspiracy.
Or it could have been a dude smoking who flicked a cigarette.
Right, exactly. Could have been an accident, could have been...
Right. Intentional, whatever.
Right.
So this is the problem with today's media is that if it doesn't fit the narrative and they want power, they will immediately assert opinion as fact and get away with it.
It's also, they see their jobs totally wrong. Like this whole, since it's literally just since Trump. Since Trump, they've seen their jobs no longer as like discovering truth, but rather policing heresy, right? Yeah. So here's a weird fact. Did you know that like at the turn of the century, here's the question, way to frame it. What do you think the most popular major was at the turn of the 20th century?
The most popular what?
Major in college. What do you think people graduated in the most?
Folklore and mythology.
That's
close enough. Theology.
Wow.
There's always going to be a market for mediocre intellects who can do nothing but point and say something doesn't fit conventional wisdom.
Right.
So we have to do something with those people. And in the turn of the century, the received wisdom meant that they would all be theology majors policing heresy. Now they're all journalists policing conspiracy theories.
Everything's a conspiracy, even when one person does it, because conspiracy theory just means story we don't agree with.
Correct.
But I have to stress, PolitiFact did no research on this, none whatsoever. They get an opinion, and some guy goes, "In my opinion, I think it's not true." Debunked. We have officially debunked a conspiracy theory by getting a guy with an opinion to say it wasn't true. Well, there are scientists who have tons of opinions on like string theory or M theory or whatever, and they probably don't agree with each other on the math. Which one's the conspiracy? Whichever one the corporations dictate. So here, I got a bunch of sources for you. Check it out. You may have heard that Rand Paul questioned Fauci about gain-of-function research. Newsweek reported on this. We've talked about it with Luke when he was here. Gain-of-function research. I think Luke took a more apocalyptic view of it, where it was like to make, Luke was saying to make the virus as crazy as possible. Gain-of-function involves, yes, increasing virility or something, but not always to make it the most.
Right. It doesn't mean you're going from 0 to 100. Maybe you're going from 10 to 15,
Or 10 to 11. What if it was, if this evolves in this way, how do we deal with it in this way? And so, yes, there was funding that went to gain-of-function research. Fauci lied in this testimony. Even PolitiFact says, well, there was funding from the U.S. to Wuhan's lab for gain-of-function research, and now the story is like maybe the lab leak thing is possible. Let me pull up some of these things I pulled up. So we got this. This is from April 28th, 2020. NIH cancels funding for bat coronavirus research project. The abrupt termination comes after the research drew President Trump's attention for its ties to the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
Late.
NIH was providing funding for bat coronavirus research at Wuhan's Institute of Virology.
That's where the bat coronavirus came from.
Yeah.
This is, well,
It came from
we
a
don't
mile
know
away from that place,
right, exactly. Like across the street. So this is thescientist.com, a NewsGuard certified source, 100 out of 100. And I use this because if it's wrong, don't get mad at me. NewsGuard said it is the cream of the crop, the best of the best, and they reported this a year before. We have this story from February 25th, 2019. Human error in high biocontainment labs, a likely pandemic threat. Incidents causing potential exposure to pathogens frequently in high security labs. You get the point. They talk about a bunch of stories. It's not necessarily about Wuhan. The point is the likelihood of a lab leak, potentially high. They say human error in high is a likely pandemic threat. So is it possible that a pathogen leaked from a lab? According to the bulletin.org, I don't know if it's like the bastion of, this one's not NewsGuard certified. They reported in 2019 it was. When we go over to the Washington Post, fact checking the Paul Fauci flap over Wuhan lab funding. This is where it gets funny because they start playing games. Well, it's not really gain of function. It's overly verbose. The grant was more like dark money. It wasn't specifically for bat coronavirus.
You sound like
but
Fauci. Right?
Yeah,
He was voice.
when you said he lied, I would be like, he was misleading.
He lied.
I don't know. I mean, because from my understanding is that he defines gain of function research in a very narrow and lawyerly way.
That's I'm sorry, that's lying.
Okay.
How does he? Do you know how he defines it?
We
I don't
have
remember
never.
exactly.
With all due respect, you are wrong. We have never provided funding for gain of function research. And then you have PolitiFact. Yes, they did gain of function research, but Fauci is arguing semantics. No, you don't get to do
pharma got a lot of shit from everybody for a really long time. And our public health authorities were always held in extremely high esteem. Like if you actually looked at that, right? Like what are people's opinion of the NIH, CDC versus what are the people's opinion of pharma companies? NIH looks like it probably caused the pandemic and killed a few million people, or has a role. I think the lab leak hypothesis is right. And if not NIH, then institutional public health, right?
Right.
And pharma companies solved it. Right.
Did you see the video from the White House where they're all hugging and kissing and no one's wearing any masks?
No.
Yeah.
That's new.
And so I tweeted the pandemic was over, somewhat facetiously. YouTube, chill. I'm making a point that the White House, nobody was doing anything. Yeah. And I mean, so there we go. I mean, the Texas and Florida have lifted restrictions obviously a while ago, and now I was recently watching. There's a CNN segment with Fauci and Chris Cuomo. And Cuomo was like, why aren't there vaccine passports? And Fauci said, because we can't force people to get the vaccine. So that means if the guideline is if you're vaccinated, you're okay, take your mask off, and these businesses can choose what they want to do. What else is left? People who don't want to get it aren't going to get it. But I will mention one thing that's really hilarious. Mm-hmm. How does it make sense that if you get the vaccine, you can still get sick, but you'll be asymptomatic like Bill Maher was recently? So you'll be able to give people COVID, right? If you're
that's not my understanding of the latest sciences that suggests that it's very not transmissible by people who've been vaccinated. In the same way that's not transmissible by people who've had it before.
Then I will stop right there and say, all right, makes sense. Yeah. There you go. So then why should people who aren't vaccinated wear masks?
Who aren't vaccinated wear masks?
Other people who aren't vaccinated don't get sick?
Well, I mean, at this point, I think you're right that that's kind of a weird argument to be making. In general, I think once facts, mask wearing before was a public health measure because there's no other measure available at all to like deal with spread. But like once everybody has the personal choice about whether to be vaccinated or not, the value of masks.
You know what's really irksome?
What?
The lab leak hypothesis was published last year by the Washington Post. And that was really the first time I saw it. There was also stories from the Daily Mail and a few others that were asking these questions. And immediately, very left-leaning Democrat media said it's a conspiracy theory. PolitiFact, for instance, is extremely
Everyone
partisan.
who did that should be out of a job. In a properly functioning media environment, every one of those journalists, that would be like... Because like, think about, how many more important questions are there than how did the pandemic that killed 3 million people start, right? And you went out there and you said the theory that actually looks like the most prominent was impossible and a debunked conspiracy theory.
Based on an
Quit.
opinion.
Go be a barista. Do something else.
And it got people's livelihoods destroyed. And like people that would talk about it online would get shut down.
Right.
And, like lost revenue and things. I agree with you.
Yeah, go be a barista. You're not a journalist anymore.
Yes.
Like you're a journalist. Maybe we need like professional licensing for journalists in the same way that we have.
I wonder now
for lawyers and
I'll
doctors.
say this: anybody out there who knows anybody who had a strike or was taken down or suspended for talking about lab leak should file a lawsuit against PolitiFact.
Yeah,
there's real damages there.
That's a real actual damages for defamation, right? Although I mean, since it probably they would say
it was
they weren't
specifically Tucker
intentionally
Carlson.
lying, but
reckless disregard for the truth by claiming that an opinion of a researcher was a fact.
Yeah,
People
you could
have
try.
to. Look,
hard.
James O'Keefe won that New York Times motion to dismiss.
He won the motion to dismiss.
Right. Which is where the judge said, if you're going to insert opinions, you have to say it's an opinion. That makes sense to me. We'll see where it goes from there. But at least he got to that point.
Yeah.
So you can't I think it's defeatist to be like, well, they'll probably say no. Well, file it anyway.
It depends. You have to be able to allege malice, right? Like, and reckless.
Reckless disregard.
But reckless disregard has it has a technical meaning, like, and that's ultimately going to be like conscious disregard. Right. So like, and proving that's always going to be very challenging. I mean, there's a unique, you got to fight. And the O'Keefe case has the unique thing of like, they have the timestamp of when the emails were sent and the impossibility of comment, which is how he got over asserting the problem of asserting malice.
So all these news outlets started lying. YouTube just agreed with the liars and then negatively impacted people. And now they're all starting to come around. Why is it that conservatives just buckle so easily?
Well, we just don't control the media. And it'd be really nice if we did.
Yeah, the media became more and more left-leaning, and maybe it'll change. Daily Wire's doing particularly well. We
need to overturn New York Times v. Sullivan. It's too hard to prove defamation. Like the intent standard that we've talked about, malice is way, because it means you have to prove someone's state of mind when they lied.
Wouldn't it be more reasonable to just be able to allege defamation, file a suit, say to a judge, here's the fact that they got wrong and proof. And if it's true, the judge can say, issue a correction.
Right. And also, I mean, think about it from the perspective of like, what is defamation, right? Defamation is you've said something that's injured someone else's reputation. Well, the person whose reputation is injured is an innocent victim who had nothing to do with it, right? You just talked about them and lied about them and said something false about them that hurt them, that did them damage. Like, maybe you should just be liable for that. Maybe we shouldn't look at whether or not you knew you were lying. Like, maybe you were, or maybe we just have a lower standard of like negligence. Like, if you didn't take reasonable care and you said something about someone that was false and did them damage, you should pay for it.
Is it so hard for the New York Times to just put apologies? We were wrong about this.
Right. Like, or God forbid, they actually just have to, they have a process where their editors ensure that whenever they make factual statements about someone that could injure their reputation, they take reasonable care.
Yeah.
Right? Like they act like reasonable journalists. Not that the standard shouldn't be, did the New York Times knowingly lie? The standard should be, did the New York Times take reasonable care?
What we do is we put the burden on the plaintiff but we get rid of the standard. So basically make it so that you have to show the court what you perceive to be defamation and evidence to support that it's what they said was demonstrably false.
Mm-hmm.
Only after those two criteria are met, then the person being sued has to respond.
I mean, that's kind of the way it works now, right? You have to, allege, and basically you have
go a step forward and actually presenting your case of like, here's proof to state that it's an incorrect statement.
Yeah, I mean, usually that's done. That's the easy part of defamation, right? Usually when you bring a defamation case, you have that evidence. And honestly, like, you probably have to do that
and
already.
Then, if I said something and then someone filed a suit against me and said, he said, X equals Y, but, actually it's X equals Z, then my response is just, here's an article from the New York Times, or whatever, and here's the evidence backing that up. Would that be sufficient?
I mean, it would be, again, probably, because you'd have to just show that, did you take reasonable care, right? Like, what reasonable care is going to look like is probably developed through judges, but we know what it looks like in the context of journalism. Like, did you research the claim? Did you try and verify it was true or false? Did you make a good faith effort to do so? If yes, then probably
It's tough. It is tough.
It's
still
really
difficult.
It's better. It's a lot better than, can you prove that I knew I was lying or that I consciously disregarded?
The problem now is the New York Times can lie, PolitiFact can lie, and you cannot do anything about it. And it gets put into the record. It gets put into historical record and encyclopedia. And then people end up believing insane BS.
And that's not the way it was in this country before New York Times v. Sullivan, which constitutionalized, right? Before that, there was libel law in every state. It totally coexisted with the First Amendment. That's not, except until like the Warren Court decided, no, we're going to eviscerate state level libel law and impose new federal rules. And then it's not the way it is in other countries too, right? Like in Europe, especially in England, like libel law sounds a lot more like what I talked about, where the standard is not, can you prove they said something false, but rather like, did you take reasonable care?
I'm concerned, like, if YouTubers smack talk each other, that one will get busted. If we repeal Times v. Sullivan, which I don't actually know, what is it exactly, Times v. Sullivan?
So Times v. Sullivan is the case that sets the standard for intent in a defamation case. And that's distinct from what you're talking about. Like, when you're smack talking, that could be like opinion, hyperbole. Like, if it's not intentionally meant as true, then it's not something that could be defamatory in the first place, right? It has to be like a false statement, put forward for its truth. I don't know if I got that exactly right.
Opinions would still be protected.
Opinions would still be protected. The question is, like, once you've demonstrated that somebody said something false about you, what do you have to prove about their state of mind, right? And if the standard is actual malice, you have to prove not only that they said something false, but that they knew it was false when they said it, or that they had what's called reckless disregard for the truth. But that reckless does a lot of work. You have to prove like conscious knowledge of or conscious disregard of things they should have done.
Potentially in the James O'Keefe case, the New York Times.
Yeah, exactly.
They didn't even bother calling the people to like fact check.
Right.
They just said James O'Keefe is lying. It's like, well, did you actually look into that? No.
And
how do you know he's lying? We don't.
That might get reversed on appeal. Like that's just one state court judge. We don't know if that ultimately proves it. Whereas again, negligence is very common throughout tort law, and that's not intent. Like, you can just be negligent if you didn't take reasonable care.
So if we repeal Times v. Sullivan, could you be negligent and not be held responsible?
Well, if we repeal Times v. Sullivan, that Times v. Sullivan set a federal rule for what the intent standard had to be in defamation cases. Repealing it means, okay, now we're back to state by state themselves figuring out what the rule should be in defamation cases.
And if I'm in Texas using a YouTube video whose headquarters is in California talking about someone in North Dakota, then are all three states involved?
Welcome to choice of law.
Oh my God.
Like, that's actually a very this is not, defamation is not the only area of law. There are obviously areas of law, contract law, for example, where most things aren't federalized in civil litigation. And so oftentimes a question comes up of which state's law do you choose to apply? And so that's very complicated. And each state has their own, here's another, really, really been right. Each state has their own laws about how to choose which law applies in their courts.
Texas and Florida's social media laws will be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, so that actually is an interesting example of, not quite in the civil litigation context, but maybe. But yeah, like, different states have different laws, and people will find ways to, especially like one thing that happens, in almost every business contract, if you sign or a lease, you'll notice that there's a choice of law clause in those leases. If you sign for an apartment that says this contract will be governed by the law of the District of Columbia or whatever, right? Like, that's, because that's a smart thing to include because it eliminates that dispute. You can contractually agree to which state's law applies.
Yeah. Well, defamation is it's probably one of the most pressing problems that we're facing right now, especially in cultural politics and politics. The record, as it stands over the past 10 years, is fake.
Yeah. Agreed.
Which
Complete-
record?
Everything.
Well, a lot of it, yeah.
Because
I mean-
the paper of record was putting out fake news, so
Right,
the
right,
record
yeah.
is fake.
The
Yes.
New York Times has put out a ton of fake news. Like, they won awards
History
for it.
now.
Awards for
Dude,
it.
we've lived in the age of obfuscation. There's so many.
It's a dark age.
It really has become kind of, there's so much light that it is blinding us and we can't see. So we might as well be in the dark.
And I mean, before they screwed up, but at least they tried. You know, they had like the New York Times got rid of its public editor. I mean, they got rid of their copy editors. They just.
Do they even have fact checkers anymore?
I mean, I assume so, but
Remember when you used to get a phone call from a fact checker and they're like, "Hi, my name's John. I'm a fact checker with the New York Times."
yeah,
and
I
I'm
got one
calling."
from the New Yorker a while back.
New Yorker doesn't.
Yeah, they still do it. Maybe it's just too expensive to do, and so whatever. Just let your activist journalists say whatever they want.
I think it was the New Yorker that put out a fake story about me, where they mashed two quotes together to make a totally out of
yeah.
context quote.
That's
Super
wild.
quote.
Yeah.
Super quote.
So basically, what happened was a story I told was offensive to some people, who then threatened. I guess I don't know exactly what happened, but I think they threatened a lawsuit. So the New Yorker just wrote what they wanted them to write, and so then the New Yorker accused me of giving them erroneous statements, which is obviously false. What happened was a guy at the New Yorker took two different stories and combined two quotes into one with like a space. So it sounded like two separate sentences from 15 minutes apart was one sentence, totally changing the context of what I had said.
Right.
And then obviously when the other individuals involved in the story saw that it was lying and making them look bad, which I never said, they told them that's not true. I never said that. So then instead of taking responsibility, they said Tim Pool provided erroneous statements. So then I called and said, no, I didn't. And the journalist told me to go screw myself. He wouldn't correct it. And it was funny because the issue was the person that I was, the story I was telling involved a massive corporation who scared the New Yorker. They weren't scared of just one guy. So they, ultimately just told me to screw off.
Wow.
Yeah, evil people.
Yeah.
Evil.
Not.
Evil.
I have so little time for modern journalism. It's so terrible. It's just it's maybe the most endlessly frustrating. It's like because every day you see a news article, and every day you're like, oh, another at best misleading article from
It's a big part of why I am concerned with cancel culture and canceling, because in an age of propaganda, you need to have access to be able to speak who you are, and so people can see it
and
from
it's
the mouth.
same people policing everybody for misinformation and heresy are the same people. I mean, I had a talk with a journalist the other day, and they were like, talking about how no, misinformation is a real threat. And I'm like, you realize that your outlets put forward a theory that a billionaire real estate magnate turned president was really secretly a Russian agent. Like, think about that for 2 seconds. That would get laughed out of a Hollywood plot. And yet that took hold of the liberal media for 3 years and was promulgated by all the, the reputable media outlets. It's a total joke.
Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to see the full show, come back to this channel, youtube.com/TimcastIRL, Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., where you can leave comments and super chat, and we actually will read your comments on the show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and if you want exclusive members-only content, segments you can't get anywhere else, go to timcast.com, become a member, and we even have full bonus episodes. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.